Chapter 50. Out of the Night. Can you be in the lobby of the King David in 30 minutes? The urgency was apparent as soon as Yakov heard the voice on the other end of the line. Ah, David, I was just getting ready to go out to visit Ari. What's up? This is related. I'll see you at the King David. There was no hiding the suppressed excitement in his friend's voice. When Yakov arrived, he saw David standing in a far corner of the crowded lobby, engaged in close conversation with a sandy-haired American in his late 40s. Rather tall and of muscular build, the man's military bearing seemed obvious in spite of the tennis shorts and flowered sports shirt he was wearing. "Meet my friend, Don Jordan," said David, as Yakov approached. "Don, this is Yakov Kimchi. He shared his apartment with Thalberg, until this incredible scandal that makes me ashamed of my colleagues at the office." "So good to meet you, Yakov," said Jordan warmly, reaching out to shake his hand. "I've heard a lot about you from David." "And I've never heard a word about you." Yakov gave David a sharp look of reproof. Why would he be speaking so freely in front of this stranger? "Relax, you old warhorse," said David. "I've known Don for at least 25 years. We go back to Vietnam. Just a couple of young bucks then. I was military attaché at our embassy in Saigon, and he was at U.S. military intelligence headquarters. We had a close relationship, learned to trust one another. He's with the FBI now and a good friend of Ken and Carla Inman. And, how about this, they attend the same prayer meeting." Yakov's face lit up with a sheepish grin. "Sorry, brother." He reached out and shook Jordan's hand again, this time with great enthusiasm. "Can't even find a place to sit down in here," complained David apologetically, "so we'll just stand. Now, down to business. Don just happens to be here with a group of Christians on a tour of Israel. We're old friends, so it doesn't matter who sees me with him. We had dinner together last night, went over the whole thing. I told him about Dmitri and gave him a copy of the tape. He agrees we've got to get Ari out. Fast." "Thank God!" exclaimed Yakov. "What can I do?" "Plenty. But first, why don't you give us your end of it?" said David, turning to Jordan. "It's doubtful that we'll ever stop Del Sasso, but we've at least got to try. The first consideration is Thalberg's safety. He's a key witness. Both our governments have been compromised, so at least for the moment we have to work outside the law. There's a whole network inside both the CIA and FBI that knows the truth and will sacrifice everything for it. And I understand there's a faction within the Mossad." He turned to David for confirmation. David nodded. "No problem. I'm not the only one. Now what I'm responsible for," Jordan continued, "is to provide Ari, and Miriam, of course, with new identities and protection at a safe location in the United States. Unfortunately, if she didn't change her identity, Ari could be traced through her, so they could never get together. Within a week, I don't think I can do it any faster than that, David will have from me, for each of them, 2 sets of U.S. passports, driver's licenses, Social Security and credit cards, and airline tickets, with detailed instructions and disguises to match their doctored photos. Ari and Miriam will use set number 3 for their flight from Frankfurt to Chicago. They'll use set number 4 from Chicago to... Well, at this moment, I don't know what that destination will be, but it will be identified when you get the documents. I'll also provide 2 similar sets of Israeli passports and papers and disguises," added David. "Ari and Miriam will fly under one set of names from Tel Aviv to Rome, and under different identities from Rome to Frankfurt. Then, of course, under their American identities from there on. 4 different identities on 4 different airlines should make it impossible to pick up the trail." "And my job?" asked Yakov. "From now on, you won't talk to Dmitri inside the hospital, even if you happen to come into contact when you're visiting Ari. Watch for him this afternoon when he gets off work and pick him up in your car. Make certain you're not observed. Explain that you won't be talking to him anymore at the hospital, but you'll be picking him up every afternoon, and that tomorrow he must make a complete list of the medications they're giving Ari and an exact description of the containers of each kind, and give you a sample of each pill. The next day, you'll pass on duplicate containers of sugar pills, which Dmitri will substitute the following day. That's 3 days from now. On the fourth day, when you visit Ari, his head should be starting to clear. You'll explain what's happening and that he must continue to act disoriented and drugged. We'll have something in the placebos to keep his eyes dilated. You've got that? Got it. We've already made the ECT equipment break down twice. It's in for repairs now, and I'll make sure it isn't fixed until Ari's gone, continued David. That takes care of the easy part. Getting him out of there without anyone sounding an alarm for at least 5 hours is not going to be so simple. Now, here's what we're going to do. True to his word, 1 week later, Jordan delivered the American passports and other identification documents and airline tickets. They came by diplomatic pouch to the U.S. Embassy in Tel Aviv in the name of a senior staff member who was a part of Jordan's network. He, in turn, passed them on secretly to a Katza, Yehuda Cohen, to whom David had already delivered the phony Israeli passports and Alitalia tickets to Rome and the Lufthansa tickets on to Frankfurt. Yehuda would be the driver who would take Ari and Miriam to the airport, provided everything went according to plan. Dmitri had performed like a professional snoop. His last task was completed without a hitch, replacing the placebos with the original medications. David had insisted upon that additional move as a safeguard for Dmitri. The crucial drug substitutions would be one phase of the operation that the ensuing investigation would never uncover. For a number of reasons, not the least of which were the airline schedules, it had been decided to pull off Ari's escape during the day rather than under cover of darkness, but not during Dmitri's shift. That dictated the means to be used. Dmitri left the hospital at about 3:10 in the afternoon. At 3:30, two Katzas in disguise and with fake Mossad IDs, Yehuda Cohen and Yosef Berg, entered the hospital. They presented the nurse in charge with orders signed by Dr. Solomon, the chief psychiatrist. Ari was to be taken to his office for a special battery of tests that were estimated to take about 5 hours. Solomon had already called an hour earlier for the patient to be dressed in his street clothes. Cohen and Berg handcuffed Ari and left with him immediately. When Ari was shoved into the back seat of the waiting car, there, to his great joy, were David on the far side with a key to unlock his handcuffs, and Miriam between them, laughing and crying at the same time. Their embrace, after 6 months' separation, had to be brief. David saw to that. There was no time to waste. "How are you feeling, Ari?" asked David brusquely. "Not back to normal by a long shot, but much better," came the reply. He looked eagerly from Miriam to the passing street scene as the car sped away. "What a relief when those shock treatments ended. You can't imagine what it's like in there. And then, the drugs. What a change when I started getting placebos." "Great. Now both of you pay close attention. Your passports and other IDs have your own photos, but doctored up to change your appearance. You each have 4 different identities, one for each time you board a new plane, and each set is in a packet numbered from 1 to 4 and also labeled with the cities of flight origin and destination. On your last flight, from Chicago to Denver, there's no passport control or customs, so you can relax, but just be sure you remember your latest names." Yehuda, who was driving, pulled over to the curb. Yosef jumped out and walked into an office building as Yehuda drove on. "Dr. Solomon's office is there on the 3rd floor," explained David. "Ari may remember him. He's the chief psychiatrist." "Do I ever!" exclaimed Ari. "He's the fiend who put me in that torture chamber." "He and a few others," said David dryly. "Well, he was persuaded to call the hospital and then to sign a release for Ari to come to his office for some tests. Yosef's going to help the other two make sure everything stays under control for the next 6 hours until you're safely in Rome." It was a bit complicated. 2 appointments and a dinner engagement had to be canceled, explanation to his wife, receptionist and nurse replaced with our people for the afternoon, but that's routine stuff. He'll be released about 10 o'clock tonight, with the threat that Ari is only the first, and unless he reviews some of the other cases under his care, there will be more vigilante action. Our people are identifying themselves as members of the Citizens Committee to End Psychiatric Abuse. We've had a few flyers and brochures printed up with that name on them and dropped around town the last few days. That will give them something to worry about, and hopefully sidetrack them from thinking that the people behind this operation are interested primarily in you, Ari." David put a briefcase on Ari's lap and showed him how to open the 2 false compartments, one on top and one on the bottom. From the bottom compartment, he pulled out a flat plastic container marked number 1. "Now, here's packet number 1. As you can see from the photos in the passports, Ari, you'll have to put on this mustache and these heavy eyebrows. Put these 4 marbles into your mouth, 2 on each side, to fatten your cheeks, and wear these plain glasses with heavy black rims at all times. Miriam, false eyelashes for you as well, a red wig, makeup, and these large glasses. Look at your names. You're Igal and Ernie Yar on this phase, which is the toughest one." "I'm not going into the terminal with you," continued David. "Yehuda's disguised, so he'll help you in with your baggage and point you out to our man in customs, who will take you through, hopefully without problems. Then you're on your own. The flight leaves in 1 hour." "Where's Yakov?" asked Ari. "He wanted to be here to say goodbye, but that would have made it too complicated. Every additional element raises the danger of detection 10 times. He wanted me to give you this as a wedding present. He apologized for not having time to wrap it. Anyway, he wanted you to use it right away." David held out a Bible, and Ari took it gratefully. "Thank him for me," said Ari. "I hated to leave the first Bible I ever owned. Yakov gave me that one, too. I'd underlined it, made notes in the margin. I was getting familiar with it, but of course I couldn't bring it." Ari noticed something sticking out of the pages and opened it there. The marker was an American $100 bill. Underlined on the page in red were these words: "And thou shalt remember all the way which the Lord thy God led thee these 40 years in the wilderness, to humble thee, and to prove thee, to know what was in thine heart, whether thou wouldst keep his commandments or no. And he humbled thee, and suffered thee to hunger, and fed thee with manna which thou knewest not, neither did thy fathers know, that he might make thee know that man doth not live by bread only, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of the Lord doth man live." Ari gave Miriam another hug. There were tears in his eyes. "I'll explain why those verses later," he said in a choked voice. "They mean a lot to me." The remainder of the brief ride to the airport was spent donning the disguises, getting used to the new feel and look, and addressing one another by their new names. Saying farewell to David was not easy. "You look after Yakov," both Ari and Miriam repeated. "We want him to come to the U.S. as soon as it's safe." "I'll take good care of him, and hopefully that can be arranged someday." "And you take care, too," said Ari as he reached over and gripped David's hand in both of his. "I owe you more than I can ever repay. If I had one wish, it would be that you would believe in Messiah Jesus. Then I'd know we'd meet again." "I didn't believe your story, but I do now. My apologies," returned David, holding on to Ari's hands. "Who knows? About this Jesus? Maybe." He could not say any more, but Ari and Miriam understood. At Lod Airport, Ari and Miriam, alias Igal and Ernie Yar, got the full treatment of the world's most intense scrutiny of passengers and baggage. If they attracted any attention at all, it was because of the affection they obviously had for each other. The practiced eyes of the hardened officials who saw all kinds and could spot a phony at a glance had no doubt that this pair was genuinely in love, and probably on their honeymoon. The thoroughness of airport security was reassuring in one sense, but they both knew they could not relax, in spite of their disguises and the Mossad agent carefully shepherding them through, until they were aloft. "Thank you, Lord," breathed Ari inwardly as they boarded. Once the plane was airborne, Ari and Miriam held each other tightly in a long embrace. Then they settled back in their seats, Miriam's head on Ari's shoulder. "Honeymooners, obviously," was the verdict written in the eyes of more than one sympathetic passenger seated nearby. "Isn't God good?" Miriam whispered. Ari could only nod and squeeze her hands. I think Yakov protected me by not saying how bad it really was at the hospital, but I suspected the worst and prayed for your deliverance day and night. I really believed that God was going to do it. And here we are." She snuggled up closer. It took Ari some time to get control of his voice. "They came within a hair of breaking me," he said quietly. "But you know, I believe even that horrifying experience was part of God's plan. The first time I read the Bible through, I came to the words of Jesus, 'Except you deny yourself and take up the cross and follow me, you can't be my disciple.' And it was like a revelation. I knew that my real problem wasn't the many enemies I'd faced in my life. I was my own worst enemy, always looking out for myself. And I said, 'Lord, right now I give up my own plans, my ambitions, even Miriam.' Darling, I really said that. 'I give myself to you to do with me what you will.' And since that moment, I've had a peace and joy that I wouldn't trade for anything this world could offer." "I loved you with a passion before," said Miriam softly, "but I love you even more now. I made the same vow many years ago, and I've been waiting for God to give me the man he had chosen. A man who wanted nothing but his will. Oh, how he's answered that prayer, Ari, my dearest love." With a heart too full for words, Ari pressed her hand to his lips. Now at last he could relax and fall asleep from the overpowering weariness he felt beside the woman he loved. They were in God's hands, together.